Just talking of mandatory vaccinations, in Victoria, it's introducing those mandatory vaccinations for authorised workers. The question many employers are asking is whether it matters if they have a mandatory vaccination policy. To tell us more, Joydeep Hoare joining us from People and Culture Strategies. Joydeep, great to talk to you again. Yeah, I mean, because this is a very vexed issue at the moment, just to how far companies should go. So what's Victoria actually bringing in?
Well, Victoria's done what the other state governments haven't done, and you were just talking earlier about what WA has in place, where they have certain occupations where they are saying at a governmental level that if you are in those particular jobs, those particular roles, you do have to be vaccinated. But it's gone a lot broader in Victoria, where they've said that come this Friday, if you are an authorised worker, regardless of the type of work that you're doing, and if your employer is intending that you work anywhere other than home, then you must have your first vaccination, and then at a later date, you've got to be double vaccinated. So it's going further than what other states have done. And what is interesting about that is that, once again, we see that across the different state governments, a different approach being taken, and employers find themselves, particularly if you've got operations straddling multiple states and territories, a little bit in a bit of a bind as to what do you do. I mean, do you apply the highest common denominator? Do you just say that we'll just do whatever is required in each state or territory? Certainly adding to the complexity of the issue for employers.
Indeed, complexity. You've hit the nail on the head there, certainly. And I guess, in fact, yesterday we heard from CSL, for instance, it's going to mandate that its workers are fully vaccinated. So what sort of trends are you seeing now among corporates as far as mandating vaccinations?
Well, it's really interesting because if you just rewind 4 months, a lot of employers would have said, we're not sure. The advice we're getting is we don't really know whether we can or we can't. We're not really getting a clear steer from the governments. What we're seeing at the moment, certainly across our client base, is a significant majority of employers who have decided that, consistent with their appreciation, awareness of their work health and safety obligations, consistent with what the government is certainly encouraging society and citizens to do, that they've got a responsibility to step up, and the best way that they can do that is to mandate vaccinations. There are a number of employers, though, who are being a little bit more passive and allowing the natural gravitation, just sitting back and not forcing it, maybe strongly encouraging it, but not going so far as to say that we're mandating it. But then you find yourselves in a situation, as Victorian employers would right now, that even if that might have been their intention or desire, well, the government has changed what they can do with that. So ultimately you end up in a position, I think we're going to see more of this, where mandating vaccinations, it would have been so much easier if the governments said, look, nationally, let's just make this something that employers need to do, certainly if they want to be bringing people back into their workplaces.
Yeah, I mean, it does beg the question. So if you've got that divergence where some companies do mandate being fully vaccinated, others that don't, but you have obviously workers that would be forward-facing, that they'd actually, perhaps those that come from a company where it's not mandatory, but they're working or meeting people from a company that where it is, you're going to have that clash, aren't you? Because there's going to be a reluctance for that engagement.
Exactly right, and this is what we're referring to as the third party problem, where an employer might say, well, here's our stance. We're not forcing it. We're maybe encouraging. We're ultimately leaving it up to the decision of an individual employee. But then that individual employee, as part of their role, might have responsibility for looking after a customer, and that particular customer, it might be a CSL, for example, who's mandated vaccinations for people coming onto their sites, or other employers, many other employers who've done similar things. They might be they might have to attend a particular venue where mandatory vaccinations are in place. So the question then becomes, how does that individual employee actually execute their role? And the employer is going to be faced with a lot of challenges here, because their options in relation to that particular employee are they either have to find work for them to do if they want to keep that person employed and feel committed to that, or they have to stand them down on some kind of leave or unpaid arrangements while this all gets sorted out. None of which is really conducive to the person being able to execute the job. And this is what's really going to cause a big problem, and again, a direct consequence of a lack of a formalised approach at governmental levels.
Joydeep, thanks for joining from People, Culture and Strategies.
Thanks for having me.